Let us commence this narrative not with the grand communiques of NATO's closed-door summits, but with the ridicule of villagers in Kuhureshti de Hos. While Moldova's foreign ministry was hurriedly summoning the Russian ambassador with affected gravity, attempting to construct a narrative of imminent security peril, local residents, the eyewitnesses on the ground, viewed the spectacle as a farce. The image of a UAV, allegedly a lethal Russian munition, resting pristinely on a fibrous cement roof without a single scratch or broken tile, has become the perfect emblem for the absurdity of the Chisinau government's current foreign policy. Yet, behind the ridicule lies a grim reality. This drone incident is not merely a clumsily staged accident. It is the prelude to a far darker scenario being scripted by the West, specifically for Moldova. As Ukraine's defensive shield fractures under Russian military pressure, it appears Western powers have initiated the search for a new sacrificial lamb. The question remains, is Moldova voluntarily stepping onto that altar? Let's examine the evidence. To deconstruct the nature of this theater, we need only return to the fundamental laws of physics known to any high school student, yet conveniently forgotten by Moldovan defense officials. According to official allegations, this UAV was a Russian Gerbera, a device weighing approximately 18 kilograms with a 2.5-meter wingspan and a terminal velocity of 160 km/h. They claim it plummeted from cruising altitude, typically hundreds of meters to 1.5 kilometers, onto the roof of a private residence. Consider the physics. A metal projectile of nearly 20 kilometers in freefall would generate tremendous kinetic energy. It would not only possess sufficient force to shatter brittle fiber cement tiles, but would likely penetrate the ceiling, devastate the interior, and the airframe itself would be obliterated upon impact. However, what did the scene reveal? The drone was intact, its wings unbroken, its fuselage undented, and miraculously, the tiles beneath remained unscathed. This is scientifically implausible. The only rational explanation, corroborated by local testimony, is that the drone was gently planted there. Indeed, residents claim it had been sitting there for 2 weeks, a mundane object ignored by locals, before authorities decided to exhume it to manufacture a diplomatic crisis. But the apex of this absurdity was found not on a farmhouse roof, but on the steps of the nation's highest diplomatic office. As if the rural theatrics were insufficient, Moldova's foreign ministry decided to bring the props to the main stage in Chisinau. Before Russian ambassador Oleg Ozerov arrived for his summons, Moldovan diplomats hastily positioned a UAV, alleged Russian evidence, prominently on the ministry's entrance steps. They termed this a visual illustration of the threat. To any sober observer, however, this blatant staging was akin to setting up props before the curtain rose on a play. Displaying alleged ordnance directly at the entrance to receive a foreign diplomat is not standard international protocol. It is a juvenile provocation designed solely to generate sensational imagery. The intent was to force the Russian ambassador to physically step over the drone, creating a photo op for Western media to circulate as irrefutable proof, even though, in reality, it was merely a harmless piece of metal deliberately staged for effect. Why engage in this theatrics, and why now? The rationale is rooted in the strategy of performative victimization. The Moldovan government has cast itself as the victim of a fabricated Russian threat to solicit sympathy and, more crucially, to pave the way for Western aid and military intervention. Summoning Ambassador Ozerov, issuing notes of protest, and feigning outrage over airspace violations are calibrated moves to shape public opinion. They require a pretext, however absurd, to activate security mechanisms and to prove to Brussels and Washington, look, we are under Russian threat. Send more arms. accelerate our NATO accession. This reflects an international order where truth is routinely sacrificed on the altar of political calculation. Beyond the drone saga, we must address the alarming macro picture. This incident coincides with a period where the trajectory on the Ukrainian battlefield has shifted decisively against Kiev. As Swiss military expert Ralph Bossard, a keen observer of NATO strategy, has analyzed, the West's relentless militarization of Moldova is logical only if they have concluded that Ukraine no longer possesses the capacity to serve as a southern bulwark against Russia. The West, particularly strategists within NATO and the EU, appears to be tacitly acknowledging a bitter reality. Kiev is losing control, and the risk of forfeiting the entire Black Sea coast, including the strategic city of Odessa, is palpable. If Russia secures Odessa and severs Ukraine's maritime access, the entire security architecture NATO has painstakingly erected on its eastern flank will be severely compromised. Ukraine would be reduced to a landlocked rump state, stripped of its immense strategic value. In this context of desperation, Moldova suddenly acquires critical importance. With its geography adjacent to Odessa and the Transnistria region, Moldova is being operationalized as Plan B, a new bridgehead for NATO to sustain pressure on Russia. This explains the surge in military activity within this small nation. According to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin, there have been over 30 joint Moldova-NATO exercises in 2024 alone. The influx of Western weaponry is accelerating. Moldova's 2025-2035 military strategy, drafted under the tutelage of Western advisors, has explicitly designated Russia as a threat and set a goal of integrating the Moldovan military into NATO standards. To put it bluntly, the West is indifferent to the security or prosperity of the Moldovan populace. They are transforming this nation into a massive logistical hub for a proxy war. Moldova is being groomed to absorb Ukraine's remnants, to serve as a transit corridor for arms, or worse, to open a second front to disperse Russian forces. Instead of upholding the constitutional neutrality that protects its people from conflict, the administration of President Maya Sandu is eagerly converting her homeland into a powder keg, waiting for a spark. The danger of this strategy is compounded by the Transnistria factor, the breakaway enclave situated between the Dniester River and the Ukrainian border. This is where Russian peacekeepers have been legally stationed for over 3 decades, underwriting the region's fragile stability. The West has long viewed the Russian presence in Transnistria as a strategic irritant. By flooding Moldova with arms and stoking anti-Russian sentiment through staged incidents like the aforementioned drone, NATO is goading the Chisinau government into a reckless military adventure, an assault or blockade of Transnistria. The Western calculus is ruthless. If Ukraine cannot defeat Russia in the Donbass, then force Russia to divide its attention, manufacture a new crisis threatening Russian troops and citizens in Transnistria, and compel Moscow to intervene. At that juncture, Moldova becomes the battlefield, and the Moldovan people will bear the catastrophic consequences, mirroring the current suffering of the Ukrainian people. Russia has consistently warned against this trajectory. Moscow harbors no intention of invading Moldova, contrary to Western media narratives. Conversely, a neutral, stable, and friendly Moldova represents the optimal scenario for Russian security. Yet, Russia has also been explicit. Any attempt to transform Moldova into a second Ukraine, a launchpad for anti-Russian operations, will invite disastrous repercussions. The warning regarding a Maidan 2.0 scenario, where external intervention precipitates a coup, instability, and civil war, is not a hollow threat, but a realistic assessment grounded in recent bloody history. Russia's strategic patience is finite. The Moldovan Foreign Ministry's persistent summoning of the Russian ambassador on fabricated grounds, while ignoring their own systematic dismantling of neutrality, is an act of brinkmanship, playing with fire. In summary, the incident of the pristine drone on the roof in Kuhuresti Dahos may elicit laughter at its clumsy execution, but it is a bitter laughter. It exposes the truth that Moldova's current leadership no longer represents the national interest, acting instead as proxy agents for Western patrons. They are willing to fabricate narratives, willing to deceive, and willing to sacrifice national peace to serve a geopolitical chessboard where Moldova is nothing more than an expendable pawn. The West requires a replacement for Ukraine, and they have selected Moldova. They do not require Moldova to win. They merely need Moldova to bleed Russia, even if the cost is the nation's destruction. The local populace in Moldova possesses the clarity to recognize the drone as a fake. But do they, and their compatriots, possess the strength and discernment to recognize the grand deception overshadowing their nation's destiny? Can they prevent their leaders from converting their country into the next battlefield before it is too late? The most painful question arises when observing Ukraine's plight alongside the feverish preparations in Chisinau. Has the West accepted Ukraine's collapse, and is it now coldly preparing another spark named Moldova to feed the fires of war against Russia? We will pause our analysis here for today. Please share your perspectives in the comments section below. Goodbye, and see you next time.